correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm Steve, and I'm here tonight with my friend Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hello. And we're also joined by two rather long-distance guests, and we'll get to those in a second as we do our D20 Network podcast spotlight this week, which is a podcast that, well, as we record, has not been added to the webpage, but it is soon to be, and that is, I wrote this down because it's a long string of words, and I won't remember them all if I don't write them down. It is called The Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny, which is a podcast about Exalted. And joining us tonight are Aramithius and Raelz, who are the hosts of said podcast. So welcome to me and Steve, and also welcome to the D20 Radio Network, guys.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's just, we're getting all official with this podcast stuff now. It's kind of veering towards scary and efficient.
Yeah, sounds dangerously like we're getting professional. We wouldn't want to confuse people.
Well,
Well, you're in the right place if you want them confused.
excellent.
You're in the right place if you want people to not know that you're professionals. Every once in a while, we get somebody that's like, "Oh yeah, you guys are professional podcast." No, stop that.
We're professionally unprofessional. That's the job here.
Yes.
I have a computer in a corner of my basement with a $50 microphone.
Yep, figures. I do occasionally feel like I need to make this into a proper studio and just kind of hang clothes horses and with stuff draped over it as sound dampening, but my ears tell me I don't need it. That's the excuse I make anyway.
Well, you know, and not to get too technical, the mic selection has a lot to do with that. And I have found what you can't see is behind my backdrop, there is a long bar of clothes hanging, and it does a wonderful job of dampening the sound.
Yes.
I just filled my room with junk.
See, mine just came full of junk.
Stuff everywhere.
Stacks of books,
Yeah.
folders of character sheets. So yeah, you guys do a podcast all about Exalted,
Yes.
which I will say I don't know a ton about. I do know that it is a world of darkness, chronic storyteller, story path, whatever, system driven. And the basic pitch I've gotten about it is basically Final Fantasy, the RPG, or at least that's how a lot of people view it. Now,
Yeah.
you actually contacted us because a couple weeks ago we did an episode, we called it F20 Super Fantasy, where we were talking about using superhero tropes in your fantasy game. And you contacted me like, "Oh, you want to come talk about a fantasy game that really is absurdly high powered?"
Yes.
And weirdly does also kind of follow all of the superhero tropes
Yes.
out of the box.
It works. So, you know, we've talked about it briefly with Jazz, who works on the OP cast, I believe, and used to work with Story Told. But yeah, so you wanted to come talk Exalted, and if you want to talk about your podcast for a little bit before we get into talking Exalted, have at it.
Yeah, sure. Basically, we are a lore podcast for Exalted, because creation as a world, as the place where Exalted happens, is big and full of stuff, and is just a fantastically fun thing to talk about. One of the biggest pulls for Exalted, if not the biggest, is the setting more than anything else, because the rules are their own beast, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But it's just a beautiful, beautiful world. It is a flat world that has basically elemental poles that get more like the thing that you're getting to as you get to each edge. It's a game where you are playing superpowered fantasy heroes out of the box. You can start off being something crazy like ruling a kingdom and wielding a sword that is tens of thousands of years old and has its own saga. And that's just a few dots on the sheet. You can already have
mentioning the spaceship that is a god that's just hanging out around there.
Yes, you get certain bits of the setting and it just gets very, very gonzo very, very quickly. And there's just so much to talk about. We just thought, let's talk about the settings and how you try and actually rein this stuff in and make it into a workable kind of thing to use in your games. So half of it is just ranting about how crazy everything is and how wonderful and how marvelous, and trying to talk over what of the game or of the setting. And the second part is, and now, how do you think about plotting that stuff? How do you use it? What sort of tricks do you try and bring in to make it manageable? So yeah, that was sort of the genesis of the podcast.
Very cool. So let me ask this. Is the map then you say it's a flat world, is it because of the poles somewhat the shape of like the profile of a rugby ball?
It's a diamond.
Yeah.
The map you get in the front of the book is always a square, but that's because it's not Discworld rules. There is an edge you can fall off. It's more napkin in a seedy diner rule, where it's kind of fraying at the edges in every edge, and you can then fall out into, well, the place where all the fairies live, which is a place that no one wants to be.
That is just pure chaos, basically. You have the four elemental poles at each point, where you've got air in the north, fire in the south, wood in the east, and water in the west, and earth slap down in the middle, kind of being your points of order, and everything after that point is just, or around that point is just a kind of a rough edge of certainty and reality, and outside of that is just formless chaos where you can go to sleep and wake up suddenly being a potted plant.
Okay. Sounds like your average D&D session with Steve. But
oh, and also it's technically, if you want to go by the scale on most of the publications, it's bigger than this world. It's bigger than Earth. You find a map and you've got a little bit of the Blessed Isle in the middle and everything else around it. The Blessed Isle is the size of Russia when you look at the scale.
Oh, wow.
And it's, yeah, there's just a lot that kind of is squeezed into that, and it's just immense fun to talk about, and that's basically what we do.
Yeah. And as you might have sort of gotten already, dynamic here is basically, as you said, ranting about how crazy it is. In Aramithius' case there, that's usually in the, oh no, how do we make this sensible case, whereas mine is with a certain manic glee.
Yeah.
I did listen to one of your episodes, and I would like to say that for as much as you profess to be very off the cuff, etc., you both have either spent an obscenely stupid amount of time like memorizing these books, or you have done more homework than Steve and I have done for the entire run of our show for every episode.
Probably somewhere between the two, in all honesty. It gets to the case, and not to overly sell Exalted to the audience here, but a lot of the stuff in those books is so out there that it does just stick in your head. It doesn't end up feeling like the sort of homework, like the aforementioned spaceship that is a god that's just chilling outside of reality. That's not all the fact that the sun is also actually a spaceship sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's almost veering into Elder Scrolls territory, but that's going to get into a horrible, horrible mix-up that we probably shouldn't talk about. That's my other two podcasts.
Look at that subtle shilling.
Absolutely.
Like I said, all I really know of Exalted, other than I've been kind of explained that it is a little Final Fantasy-ish in terms of the way it works.
Yep.
I do know it runs off the storyteller/story path engine, which is fistfuls of D10s.
Yes.
And that's kind of, I mean, other than, again, from some of what I've heard some other podcasts talk about, and the one episode I listened to of yours, it also feels like it has a very, very strong kind of social and societal element to it as well.
Yeah. The thing that I've sort of always said to people is that there are three Exalteds. There is the Exalted that Exalted's books and Exalted's marketing want you to believe exists. There is the Exalted that the community wants you to believe exists. And then there is the actual game. And they are three completely different beasts.
Yes, because they are getting, well, the books themselves are getting steadily better and better researched into what they're actually dealing with, and they will actually kind of dig into the realities of sort of governance and empire and that sort of thing, and the effect that kind of thing has on the people that run it. And it takes it quite seriously to say, yes, this is a bad thing, and that things need to change, and make sure that you portray it all that way, and that you are at the same time kind of fighting against all of this stuff to try and make the world a better place, whatever that means for your particular character and your particular type of character. But you can also just not have any of that seriousness in there at all, and just be Greek heroes smashed into an anime.
Yeah, that's the other big one that hasn't been sort of mentioned thus far, is as much as all of the skin and set dressing on Exalted is very, very East Asian inspired. It gets wider when you look at other parts of the world, but if you are picking up Exalted off the shelf, you're going to be like, it's a Chinese or Japanese role-playing sort of thing. But a lot of their storytelling tropes, a lot of their actual design things, especially in the older editions, are ripped straight from the Greek. Mostly because it wants you to be big, it wants you to be powerful, it wants you to be capital E epic. And that's sort of the thing that made us jump when we heard your F20 super fancy thing, because that's basically what Exalted is trying to do out the gate. It's the standard one of the line that we go for it is, a normal human person, even fully armored and with a sword, normally counts as a trivial NPC for player characters. You don't give it stats, it falls over and dies. When there's 10 or 20 of them, then we talk.
Yes, and so you engage the Lords of Hyrule mode, and then you can actually do things.
So I guess then maybe this is a good time to insert, we take questions from some of our Patreon supporters, and we let them know in advance sometimes, we're talking about certain things. And had one of our listeners ask us, what, and you've touched on some of it already, but what sets Exalted apart from other fantasy games? Why would you play Exalted instead of, say, D&D or Pathfinder or Earth Dawn?
Scale. Even with Earth Dawn, because I'll go out there at the front. I have little to no experience with D&D. I have a reasonable amount with Pathfinder and a tangential amount with Earth Dawn. It's all in the scale. Like, to take the Earth Dawn example. In Earth Dawn, the horrors are an existential threat. When you see them, you run because everything is going. In Exalted, the equivalent that you have for that of the fair folk, they can be starting enemies, and you go up from there.
Yes, I've literally done a one-shot for Exalted where the first combat is you punching down a river god. So you're dealing with bigger themes, epic stuff, having a much higher power level. It makes the conflicts different. So you can start ruling a kingdom or wielding a sword that already has its own legend and can basically shatter armies with a single swing at the start. So it puts a very, very different focus on the kinds of stories that you can tell and the kinds of conflicts, the kinds of challenges that you as a GM are kind of putting across. So it's just a different mode of operating compared to most games.
Now, this one does tend to get some Exalted fans taking up their pitchforks and lit torches at me whenever I go for this, because it's part of the 3 Exalted thing. It's part of what the community stereotype for Exalted was, and some people get antsy about that, but it can take, I should say, a very, very sort of Saturday morning cartoon stroke through to anime sort of tone. And that's what you can do. You can go big, you can go heroic, I have somewhere lying around on my computer a run-up character sheet I made, because you can just make He-Man exactly to almost every degree in Exalted's character engine, and it works. And I can just hear from the giggle there, you're trying to figure out how I did it.
Yeah.
The answer is exigent, and it's in the sword.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it's that sort of thing. You can't, and I would go further to say that a lot of the stories that you can tell in D&D and Earth Dawn and all of those, you can't do in Exalted. Like we've discussed this and we've argued about this on our podcast a lot. The standard sort of D&D meet in the tavern, crawl through a dungeon for hire. Exalted has hard time, and you have to take some spanners to make it work.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you're saying that both, with almost like the mythology tie-ins, especially the Greek and whatever, that in some ways they've almost taken and I like the kind of caricature kind of take that a lot of, be it Final Fantasy or a lot of the anime has taken on the central characters of the story, where they are these much, much bigger, exaggerated. And in this case, it sounds like you've taken that and turned up the kind of the I don't know if the mythology is the right word for the world, but kind of you've done that with the setting and also with the characters that you're actually playing.
Yeah.
And so there, it's almost like a Gulliver and the Lilliputians
Yeah.
in regards
Yes.
to power levels, I guess.
Yeah. It's you basically if you had your normal fantasy world and you wanted to get Exalted out of it, you'd basically take your little mad scientist's bank of dials and you would twist all of them to 11 for better or worse.
Yes, and it is one of the things that various different editions have tried to wrestle with Exalted, but the problem of mortals not mattering, your baseline humans kind of being a problem, is an interesting one. I mean, 3rd edition is trying to rebalance that to a degree, but base level humans and to an extent the less powerful exalts have just occasionally been seen as speed bumps by the setting more than actual challenges. So it's a problem, and you can do some things to tweak it, but it's just
imagine in your D&D context if your party started at 9th level and almost everyone in the world was a little baby kobold. That is the equivalent of what you are. I had one of my players in one of my games, and outright completely rip off a Superman speech where he did the world full of cardboard speech, and I felt I had to reward him for experience with it because it worked. And go Google that speech if you haven't read or heard from the animated one of it before, because it's great. The whole thing about being super duper powerful and how when everything around you is so weak and fragile that's the constantly having to hold back sort of thing. And that is one of the caveats of Exalted, and it only really works, frankly, because most players think like people rather than thinking like superhumans.
Yes, and that's
I've had players who've seen like 10 town guards coming down at them with spears and have decided that the best option here is to run, we can't handle that fight. And it's like, no, you absolutely can.
Yeah, and that's with characters that aren't optimized for combat.
Yeah.
So and that's another thing, that the kind of the contrast between the human, as in the emotional, illogical side, and kind of godlike power that's just been given, and how you deal with that in whatever context. That's generally the central question, regardless of the type of Exalt you're playing, and you do get different flavors depending on what the blessing of what god is particularly has been given to that particular character. But the central question for most of it is kind of, what does this particular human do with that amount of power, and where is it going to go wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, so are your characters in Exalted then, so to speak, again, maybe not the exact proper use of the word, but are they basically uplifted humans that have been blessed by some deity or something? I know I've heard a lot of talk about solars and lunars and etc. and so forth. I don't know all of them, obviously, but
mostly it's the weird thing of, we and the books and everyone sort of use exalts as a general term, but they come in, if you want to simplify it to the simply two distinct varieties, because there are those that are uplifted humans, which are your solars, your lunars, things that are given by one of the big powers, and you pick up a human and say, you get superpowers today. Normally they don't explain why either, because that's always fun. But then it used to be just one kind, now it's actually quite a few with the new ones that they're making in this new edition that are born that way. The Dragon Bloods, as they are called with the name there, it is hereditary. You can get it from your parents. And now also, technically, some of the newer ones like Liminals that are basically just Frankenstein. And arguably alchemicals, who are the robots that live in the God spaceship, but I keep getting hit with a spanner whenever I start talking about the God spaceship in our podcast.
Yeah, I know, you're just desperate to talk about Autochthonia, but we don't have enough materials yet. Or at least not in 3rd edition. But yeah, so you've got those sort of different power levels, and they all have different constraints as well. Like dragon-blooded are generally socially acceptable, shall we say, whereas your more powerful celestial level ones, solars and lunars particularly, are considered anathema by the dominant religion and culture of the world, and so they have to run and hide. Otherwise, lots and lots of fairly powerful people with pitchforks and torches will come and hunt them down. So it sort of balances that way.
Okay, so I'm going to ask this, and bear with me here. How does Exalted deal with the power spiral? Because it sounds like you guys are really dealing at a really high level, and that the characters are super high level, powerful wise. Is there a power spiral? Is there a vacuum? What's the landscape kind of look like? Can things get out of hand? Is basically what I'm asking.
It's
And
designed with the idea that they. I can't say with the idea that they will, because it's designed with it, they're not getting out of hand. But it's the case of both the floor and the ceiling with power level nonsense are set a lot higher than you'd expect. Like, it's, as you sort of mentioned, it's entirely reasonable to expect that your characters will have a disagreement with a god and will solve that by punching them. And it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so it's a case of the challenges being different, as in the things that will get in your way to stop you doing a thing are going to be different when you're on that scale. It takes a bit of a time for any players to grok it. So if you've got someone who's new to Exalted playing, they will, again, as we said, kind of run away from the town guards and think, oh, this particular person, this particular mortal is going to be problematic, so we need to find some elaborate way of dealing with them. No, you don't. You just need to deal with them and be done. So the things that are actually going to get in your way are things that are of a similar level to you. And so you will have more elaborate, more complex antagonists that you also potentially will see again and again. Exalted's power levels give you the opportunity for reasons for people to be recurring, rather than you just face the big bad and you kill them. And so you can wind up with those sorts of relationships quite well. The other fun thing is that you make it a game of consequences, otherwise known as kind of what Daenerys found out when she liberated the East in Game of Thrones. It's the case of, right, you want to free everyone. Fine, the place is now chaos because you've completely disrupted the old social order, and the slaves are running riot in the streets. People are getting strung up because they were old slave owners. What do you want to do about that? Is that a problem? And which the case of most players will think, well, yes, and so they try to find ways to deal with that. So you want to say, okay, cool, I want to build this fantastic sword that will split continents in two. Okay, you've got to hunt down this and this ingredient, and you've got to come up against certain monsters that will be guarding those resources. And then what happens when the sword actually activates, and does it work according to plan, and all those sorts of questions. It's a very different mindset from, oh, we need to clear the goblins out of the cave.
Right.
So it sounds almost like it's a game whose core premise is, everyone thinks the management at work is a bunch of idiots. So, okay, here you go. Now you get to herd the cats.
Yeah. And frankly, even in our podcast, I tend to play into that a little bit, because using the phrase "the management at work," there is, how can I put this? Heaven is run by the magical CIA, and
heaven is also a bureaucracy.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a meme in the community. It's also a bit completely accurate to take issues with them, these sidereals as they're called. But equally, anytime that you sort of actually sit down and think about it, like, how would I do it better with the board set out how it is? The answer is you wouldn't. And heck, even in the game that I finished running recently, because I was running for some of my players one that lasted almost 2 years, that ended recently, where they kind of, as soon as they found out how the conspiracy goes, they started fighting against them, tried hunting these people down, and watching as everything started falling out around them with the whole necessary evil thing. It is the game of consequences, like you sort of said. Of you can do whatever you like. Should you?
That's Breaking Bad-esque in a way, then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it just sounds like, interesting. And I have to say, of late, I've found myself, when I say I'm interested in a game, a lot of time that means I'm interested in this game as something I would run.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what drives a lot of what I buy. Exalted, to me, based on previous explanations and you guys tonight, sounds very much like a game I would like to play, but I am terrified of trying to learn the amount of information necessary to run it.
Yeah, it's I would say it's kind of a game of two halves from the DM side, because I am a by choice forever GM for Exalted, because I've played it a sort of few times, and I find it a lot more pleasant sitting behind the GM seat for Exalted than I do in the players one. Mechanically, it is very, 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 very simple to go for. It's, compared to a lot of other games I've tried to run, Exalted is relatively simple. I mean, it's on the sort of old storytelling-esque engine, so it's never going to get too wacky, but it is, like you sort of say, fistfuls of D10s, and you never have to add up anything that isn't based in 5s.
Yeah, and from a setting point of view, yes, the setting can be very intimidating. I fully understand that, and the way that you try and unpack one element, it will always try and lead into another one, because everything is very well crafted and interconnected. But you can run things where you absolutely ignore all of that, because creation is so big. You can just pick a random spot in the map where nothing is mentioned at all officially and say, right, there's about 5 kingdoms there. Let's go and play in that and make your own setting with the right sort of flavouring as you understand the setting. So you don't have to absorb all of the information if you don't want to at that particular point, and kind of make the game your own to a degree without feeling like you're disrupting too much. And also the default type of Exalted, the Solar Exalted, kind of have that in mind, because within the lore of the game, they have all of a sudden just come back. Everyone is wondering where on earth all of these brand new shining golden people have come from. They don't really know themselves, and
their divine patron is not returning his calls.
Not at all. There are no institutions around them in the world, whereas there are with quite a few of the other Exalt types. And so you can just make it whatever you like without any real consequences within the system, and then plug it into the extended stuff as you kind of feel that out.
Yeah, and equally you can also, and this is especially useful when you've got players who don't know much about the setting, because the god that does create Solars, the Unconquered Sun, is, and I'm going to start saying my controversial thing again, that he is the god of humanity above a lot of all other things. I've had this ramble at you several times. I will not do it again.
Yes, okay.
He's basically a god of humanity. He does tend to, you can very easily sort of justify that, yeah, Biff, Chip, and Kipper, the peasants, have all just been picked up. They don't know that the world even goes beyond their village, and you can then have the thing of the players discovering the world and the setting as much as the characters are, versus a lot of the others that tend to be a bit pickier about who they go for.
Okay. So I know that the storyteller path games that I'm more familiar with are, the Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, etc., and where there was a very strong meta plot in the setting. You mentioned Exalted somewhat has that, but it also sounds like to a certain point, Exalted could very much be set up in kind of this static thing, like, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the D&D setting of Eberron at all, where it is very static in its way. It's very static, but there's all these different elements, so to speak, on a teeter-totter, and the fun for me with that setting a lot of times is you can go to this section and focus on this thing and to not deal with this other stuff, or you can go here and play this, real gritty noir kind of street level thing. Is Exalted a bit that way, or am I misreading some commentary here?
No, this is more a problem with the fact of we cover all 3 editions of it, because this is absolutely an inter-edition thing. 3rd edition, the latest one, is very much in the Eberron sort of thing, where it's trying to avoid meta plot, just set the board, everything is about to go wrong, but it hasn't yet, play as you like. 2nd edition, my precious child, was, I will argue, and I can say this coming from the point of having read a lot of the old White Wolf meta plots across a lot of their games, the wackiest White Wolf meta plots ever got. It went really hard into it, and I think because of how it went, their 3rd edition had no choice but to just try and make a flat playground. So it's a case of, if you are willing to do the background reading for it, pretty much, of digging up the old books, you can either find and use lots of meta plot, or take what you're giving in 3rd, where you are given that sandbox. It is very much in the ref's choice, pretty much, as to which one of those 2 continuities you want to go with.
Yeah, and that'll also shift the tone sometimes as well, because second edition tonally is quite different to third,
Yeah.
because that can sort of veer into the kind of not exactly science fantasy, but the word magitech comes up, and kind of sufficiently advanced magic that's indistinguishable from technology kind of becomes a thing as well. So
The god who is a spaceship who builds robots.
yes. um, yeah, so there's a lot of tonal differences between editions as well, which if you are kind of coming to Exalted, then be aware of those. There is a free kind of style guide. It's intended for Exalted content creators who are saying, well, if you want to write for first edition, this is the thematics. If you want to write for second edition, these are the themes. But it's also a reasonable guide for understanding where all of the material comes from if you're just reading it.
Okay. So what are then, just since you brought it up, what are kind of the core themes of Exalted? And if they do, as you say, they're vary by edition, what are they?
I was going to say, we tend to chop it up mostly just because, especially when it comes to the fluff, the lore and the setting and all of that, it is very much a tale of two cities, because first and third are very similar, and then second is a weird little alien. So I think you can start with first and third because that's your beast.
Yeah, sure. Well, first is a little bit sort of dying of the light in some ways, that it's that you are kind of chosen heroes fighting against some kind of doomed inevitability that's going to come about. There's sort of hints at that here and there, but first edition is kind of make your mark upon the world and be human, whereas and to the extent of you have been given the chance to make a choice and make a difference through what you are. Third is, again, rewinding a bit, going a bit back into the mysteriousness, partly because second really overdefined everything. But third edition is trying to make things on a level a bit more, whereas first is kind of Solar Exalted are back and are the big last hope for creation. Third is kind of shying away from that and saying that yes, they are there and they are wild cards and no one knows quite what to do with them, but everything else kind of has its place as well. You've also got third edition, to me, also feels a bit more leaning into the ideas around artifacts and wondrous things in a way that first doesn't particularly. That artifacts are something marvelous and as almost not exactly things of a bygone age, because that's a lot more sort of second beast, but every edition kind of has rough undertones of it being semi-post-apocalyptic, but third sort of leans into that rediscovery aspect of it quite a bit more than the other two, I feel. And it's a feel of kind of make it your own a bit more. It's a bit more of a toolbox approach. And yeah, I'm now going to let Raelz loose and say, talk second edition, because that is what you do.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that people described it as Final Fantasy the RPG. I could not put it more succinctly myself. That is what second is in a nutshell. And if the Final Fantasy fans are going to start asking which one, yes, all of them. It would do your classic fantasy where you can be swording and sorcerying. It can do your Final Fantasy VII style. This is a city with cars and spaceships and all of the other nonsense. It, like Aramithius mentioned earlier, it did have a tendency to define. I won't say over-define. I'm a lore hound. I like that sort of thing. But because it had a meta plot, it seemed to feel obligated to constantly reveal more and more and more and up the stakes. So it very, very quickly... The things that first and third try to focus on as, look at this is amazing and wondrous in and of itself. You're a player character. Second very quickly will make that, yes, okay, you've accepted you're a player character. Now here's something new and bigger and more interesting. It focused a lot more on the cosmology of the setting and a lot more on the plane hopping. You would spend a lot less of your time on creation in second, because there are a lot of other planes that you could head to, all with interesting stories and big powers that you would be interfacing with routinely. Because while, yeah, every edition of Exalted can have you go and find the local river god and punch his chin in because you don't like him, the thing with second is that you would go and find the things that created reality itself that are now imprisoned deep beneath the world. And you can go and kick them as well if you like. It had a lot of meta plot where the other ones were post-apocalyptic and very much, look at the inevitability and the way that things used to be. Second would very much incentivize you to, if not be the apocalypse, at least go through it. I constantly reference in our episodes one of the last supplements that was made for it, the Return of the Scarlet Empress adventure line, which is basically the case of, oh, you thought the world was bad? Well, watch as we set loose all of the big things that have been threatening to go wild for a while now. And that's the sort of tone it goes for. It is very, very more... While first is very Greek, and third is very global, second, despite all of the theming and everything else changing, feels the most Japanese of the three, and feels the most sort of explicitly JRPG. Because the standard storyline there of start out as 5 teenagers fighting a slime, end by killing God, that's how most games of second go. And that's kind of what it expects. It wants you to engage with the highest levels of power. It wants you as players and as a DM to feel like you are making massive impacts on the world and being not just the main characters of the game, but the main characters of the setting.
Yeah, whereas third sort of explicitly backs away from that and says, no, make this your stories, your worlds, your part of creation that matters, tell your own stories, and don't get sucked into everything that's world spanning if you don't want to. I mean, there is still the levers there to do that, but they are very much de-emphasized in how it's talked about, because second can feel overwhelming. I mean, there's the amount of nouns that Raelz has just thrown out trying to describe it, I think, explains how it can feel.
Yeah. And that was for reference as well, with me filing the proper names off of everything to try and make it less confusing.
Yeah, and so third as a reaction to that has just made it much more personal, much more about whatever stories your characters want to tell.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like and maybe try and circle back a little bit to what kind of began this all is the superhero tie-ins, that first and to a lesser extent third are very much in the with great power comes great responsibility vein, where second is more, oh, look what you could do.
Yeah. It's if I had to go comic booky about it, first and third are going to be they are going to be your Spider-Mans, your those sorts of things. It's going to be most of the comic books that most people default go for. Whereas if second was written as a Western comic book, it'd be something bizarre by like Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore, and I can't think anyone else would do something second flavored. Like it's the weird thing that the perfect visuals I always come to mind for when doing second edition Exalted stuff come from Alan Moore's run on Captain Britain. That is my visual for a lot of second edition Exalted.
Well, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Because the more you talk about second edition, the more I'm like, I think this might be the one. This might be the one. Because I looked over third and was like, this seems really grounded.
Yes. And
second sounds not. And I love me some just insanity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's the sort of thing of like with the nice standard one I like to go with second is one of the relatively, I won't say secondary, but not the most interesting thing happening at that point in one of the pre-written adventures that you can go for is crashing the wedding between the previous queen of the previous queen of the big empire and Cthulhu, I think is an appropriate way to refer to the Ebon Dragon.
Yeah.
Where you have to stop her marrying that. And that's weirdly not the main thing that it expects the players to be focusing on out of all the nonsense that's going on at that point.
Oh, and by the way.
Yes, it is very much
pretty
that.
Much. It's because you're focusing on stopping the fact that the God spaceship is crashing into Earth.
Nah, it's fine.
You're really hung up on this God spaceship, aren't you?
I love
understand why. I can understand why. I like the idea of a God spaceship. I like the idea that
it's even better with his story, because he is to talk about Autochthon here, because I won't get to on our podcast for at least 80 more episodes, given what a sort of structure is going to be. Back when reality was made, one of the beings that made it was called Autochthon, the great maker. He liked building things. He made technology and made a lot of physical stuff. He was kind of the ugly duckling of the family there. Everyone made fun of him and kept breaking his toys. So he decided to leave. He just checked out of reality, but brought a bunch of people with him because he liked humans, because they also made stuff. and so he let them live inside him and turned himself into a spaceship.
I want to set my game there.
You can.
Yes,
There
you
was
can.
an entire supplement book to do it, and it's great because the whole thing is a spaceship and everything is very, very sci-fi despite the rest of the game being all fantasy, but it's working in the same cosmological rules.
Yeah, it's
and
kind of...
the baddies and the corruption there are horrifying H.R. Geiger biomechanical monsters.
Nice. Wonderful.
It's a spaceship world thing that has basically a kind of industrial hellscape as kind of as the way I think about everything.
Yeah.
Everything is factories. Food is manufactured.
Everything is always moving because
Yeah.
the cities, they aren't fixed. Their locations are only noted relative to each other because they are all basically in this sort of orrery thing where they're all rotating around, and one of the standard ways of execution of criminals in one of the cities is getting thrown off into the mechanism that keeps the city moving.
Ooh.
Okay.
Now you buried the lead on that one because I love that. I'll take like 1 billion of that.
You piqued my interest specifically here with something because, and I still haven't actually gotten around to seeing the movie, but a few years ago, Peter Jackson did that movie that was called Mortal Engines.
Oh, don't worry about it, Steve.
The adaptation
you
of
didn't
the
miss
books.
much.
And
I feel like I'm the only person young enough to have read them.
all I know is when I saw the trailers for that movie, I went, there's an RPG world I want to play in.
Yes.
They never made a proper RPG of that, to my knowledge. If they have, it's because something has changed. Because they were an adaptation of a young adult novel series, and the author just didn't want anyone doing anything with their work until the cinema happened. But it is amazing, and Autochthona is similar with the moving cities, except instead of that one, the cities move around because they're being piloted. This one, they are all on pretty much automated motions because most of the big structures of the spaceship are fixed, and it was more efficient, according to the will of the god machine, to move the cities between the different things they would need across the course of a year than to have people go that way. So it's the case of the harvest is when your city passes by the food manufactories.
Well, but okay, this to me sounds like this incredibly delicious bit of sarcasm of like the bureaucratic nonsense that like it there's something just really delightful about that in that like that it would tie almost and make it maybe almost a little, I don't know if dystopian's the right word.
Yeah, no,
It's totally the right word.
It really is, and they even focus on that to a degree because it's the thing of everyone in there knows that their spaceship that they're in and their world is also their god, and so it's this weird case of there's this parallel religious, bureaucratic, and engineering hierarchy that exists that differs slightly in each of the cities, but is still sort of there, and everything is very, very bureaucratic, very, very mechanical, but also in a way that I can only really sort of described by, again, if people have done Chronicles of Darkness and seen some of the stuff from Demon the Descent, it's that sort of reading occult significance in everything around you, but this time it's weirdly justified because no, you are in God. The fact that like the door to your house was stuck might not just be the door getting stuck. It could be the God trying to tell you don't go outside today.
Yeah, plus the fact that the god and your world is dying is another
he's
threat
in a
to
coma and is slowly rotting because checking out of reality sounds all great until you realize that the only thing outside of reality is extremely toxic, even to a being as big as you.
And so, yeah, insofar as there is a meta plot for Autochthonia, it's basically them invading creation to try and stabilize their world by pillaging parts.
Yeah.
Having to come back to reality to avoid the danger of unreality.
Yes.
Yeah, this has you written all over it, Steve.
I know. I keep hearing this, and I'm like, I like all of these things.
And it's they're coming back to reality as hostiles because they don't want to go and live there. Because imagine if you were living in Star Trek and then you turned up in what is a pastiche of the Bronze Age. Why would I do that? We have running water and TV, so they're just going to try and scrap it for parts.
Can we make running water and TV here? And how many people
they have,
do I
but
have
that's a
to
separate
kill to
point.
do that?
Yeah, that's another thing about a lot of it, that even across editions, Exalted does a lot of kind of making magical versions of modern technology and not really hiding the fact very well.
Yeah, I mean, even in third, which tries to tone that down, there is still a city that is famous because it has... How do they describe chiaroscuro in the books? Because I just keep saying as apartment complexes with indoor plumbing and air conditioning.
Yeah, it's basically that chiaroscuro is a place with magnificent glass towers that people can reforge and reuse the glass, but they can't do anything. They can't make it anymore. Everything is kind of starting to break down. No one really knows what magical workings are within the towers themselves and all that sort of stuff.
And there's an old lady landlady ghost that will rent out bits of the towers for you to live in.
Yeah, but without actually looking the stuff up, that I don't know off the top of my head quite how distinct that is. But I always kind of see it as kind of a mixture of some of the stuff that you see in central London and Wizard Towers.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
goes in my head.
Are some of the head writers British? Because this is all like, and don't take this, don't get upset by this, but this is all very like, I see this out of like Judge Dredd and like the 2000 AD stuff. Like this is all very post Thatcher British like style dystopia.
Yeah. I'm trying to think because I know one of the lead designers basically is somehow Scandinavian. I can never remember which one. Not around anymore. With the O in his name, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I'm very bad at Scandinavian phonologies.
Right. Yeah, I just was because I keep hearing these things and I'm like, these are all like, there's a certain flavor to European dystopianism, and I'm not trying to be that rude or anything, but
no, it's Slay has that a bunch too.
Yeah,
with some of their stuff, it is a very kind of distinct flavor of it that I in most cases find like deliciously cynically amusing.
Oh yeah. Yes. No, I'm not disagreeing with that, but
we're a lot more miserable over here.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of things that you can do with tone anyway in Exalted. You can go everywhere from that to like one of the games that I'm gearing up to doing. We've got the first session of it this Sunday is a high school game. You have a bunch of dragon blooded Exalted in high school, and with everything that implies. So sort of your Harry Potter anime high school stuff.
That sounds fun.
And the game can just do a lot with it, and so tone is definitely there, but it's also very, very variable depending on what type of games you want to run.
Okay.
And the lore weirdly provides for all of it, kind of with even hand, because the high school stuff that's not something that he will have just come up with carte blanche. There's in all of the books, even across the older editions, there are massive sections about and here's what the education system looks like in the realm.
That's cool. I appreciate that bit of granularity.
So to go to maybe sort of, I mean, been a wonderful conversation, but what sort of, you were talking about how, and when we were setting this all up, how kind of Exalted likes to lean into these superhero tropes. Are there anything you kind of want to point at specifically or vaguely or somethingly?
To sort of start at the surface level and then go deeper from there. Even at the secret identity level, especially third, really loves the idea of if you're playing anything other than a Dragonblood, you are probably going to be hiding what you are. And the secret identity thing, I believe that if not third edition core, then the Luna's book do outright provide, here's how you'd go about maintaining a secret identity and all of that sort of stuff. Mostly because he mentioned it earlier of sort of social acceptability and the religion not liking it. It's a bit stronger than that, frankly. Anything that is not a Dragonblood but is very magical is marked for death.
Yeah, it's kind
very few exceptions.
It's heresy in the Warhammer 40k sense.
Yeah.
In terms of other tropes for superheroes, again, great power and great responsibility. We've kind of mentioned it's because a lot of your themes, particularly for Solars, are going to be games of consequences. So kind of
the Solars have a hubris meter.
Yes. Yeah, so you've got to be careful about what you do, and kind of being very, very careful about how everything is handled, and the distinction between those with power and those without. And it's not something the game really leans into, but you can absolutely say kind of sticking up for the little guy sort of thing as part of your games, and kind of the impact of what you're doing everywhere else is quite easy to highlight with how the game puts it across. You can paint with quite a broad brush.
You can do your proper city-destroying battles with supervillains. That's arguably how most battles with anything that's on your power level's gonna go, no matter how you try to handle it. And even on a very superficial level, every type of Exalt has a Batman class. There is no better way to put it, because they treat your Exalt type as your D&D race, treat your cast aspect, they change the name for each Exalt, as your class. Each and every one of them has what I can call a Batman class, just like how each and every one has a nerd class.
Yeah, you've got ones that will kind of stick to the shadows. They're kind of pitched as rogues, but the kind of stuff that they get up to is a level above that. You will be given ways to melt into the shadows, to do things like leap from one shadow to another, and do things like flight and the various other aspects of stealth that will all do into that. And superpowers for Exalts are perfectly normal. It's not the case that you've got your magic bods and everyone else is just swinging a sword. No, every Exalt type has some sort of powers that you can use, and uses magic to some degree. Sorcery as a distinct kind of learned magic does exist as something that's different, but you've got your powers magic in inverted commas as with every single type of Exalt, and you've got various things from just does thing gooder, having some really, really specific call outs to mythology and to a lesser extent superhero powers. I've started saying that, and I can't think of any charms that are particularly superhero power references.
Sorry, the heat vision.
Oh, yeah.
One of the solo ones from Arms of the Chosen is literally heat vision.
Yes. Monkey leap technique is leap a building in a single bound.
That dragon-blooded athletics one that is Spider-Manning on walls.
Yep. But yeah, you've got that sort of power level of, it's not your standard fantasy kind of powers. They're kind of the level above that. One level of it is anime, but the other is superhero, because they both go over the top in what they do. There's quite a bit of overlap.
Okay, and you're saying that for the most part, you can do all this cool stuff, but you can't let anyone see you do it.
Most of the time, yeah. It's why a dragon-blooded game is a very different kind of prospect, because the Solars, if you get seen, you basically have three choices. Either A, the people love you so much that they'll keep your secret, which, if the local dragon-blooded authorities are incompetent or repressive or whatever else, is reasonably likely. B, you have some sort of way of making them forget, and the number of powers that can do an effective memory wipe is quite significant, even in Solars who aren't the experts in that. The aforementioned sort of magic CIA, they can do that globally, which is always very fun. Or C, you have the uncomfortable case of having to leave no witnesses. Because if word gets out, you as a Solar, like we were sort of discussing, you can handle basically anything that gets thrown at you one-on-one. The Dragonbloods know this. They get armies of magical people to come after you. They send their wild hunts, and those are still very effective.
You've got a bit of a Men in Black element here, too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, particularly with sidereals. I mean, they draw from a whole bunch of different tropes. Like, they are your weird martial artists par excellence. Like, you can punch someone and they will forget everyone they've ever known, or their grandfather never existed. One of the two. Those sorts of weird effects. And yeah,
they are empowered by the Maidens of Fate, which sounds like all cool Destiny causality stuff, and it talks about threads and tapestry and all that, and you're thinking that's cool, until you realise that that's also the physics engine of the world, and that's what they play with.
Yeah, you can kind of play it like Matrix agents or Men in Black or whatever, those sorts of themes within the Exalted world. They
famously have the ability to punch someone so hard that he stops being a human, because you shunt him into the next Destiny over and he becomes a duck.
Oh, well.
And that's only one of the sidereal martial arts. I didn't even mention the one where you karate chop the economy and crash a market.
It gets yeah, we're kind of veering into mage here, I feel.
Yeah, this is where I have to mention it, because if I don't mention it now, what I say in the Game of the Week thing will make even less sense. First edition Exalted was very briefly going to be sold as a prequel to the World of Darkness. They wanted to say that the world was like this before an apocalypse happened and it turned into the real world. And so every one of the old Exalt types actually does map to a classic World of Darkness thing that they were supposed to become. Because Solars weirdly was supposed to be hunters, which is a whole thing, but old World of Darkness hunters were weird as well, and weirdly tied to Exalted in a different way, but separate ramble. The Sidereals were going to be mages, Abyssals, who are your necromantically powered. If I just call them vampires, then it's obvious that they were to become vampires, but yeah, that's kind of the trope they lean into hardest, etc., etc. Dragonblood's becoming the Kuei Jin, so on and so forth. That was something that they abandoned after releasing like 2 or 3 books for first edition Exalted, but I haven't forgotten. I'll never forget, and I still treat it as absolutely canon, because it's weirdly not the strangest thing that could happen to that world. Was it becoming Earth?
Well, any final thoughts before we move into our next segment here?
Not especially, just play Exalted. It can handle any fantasy thing you can throw at it, so long as it is big and crazy, and just go for it. Go to it for your Gonzo fantasy. It's a magnificent ride.
Okay, and your podcast is Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny, correct?
Yes.
Where we try to make it sound less insane, briefly.
Yes. If you hadn't already gathered from the name of the podcast, it's Exalted buys into a lot of the very, very silly, over-the-top naming conventions of most anime or whatever.
That's a wuxia thing. The names are all a Chinese wuxia novel thing where everything has a really long name like that. Like the 7 Destiny Shrike or something is a standard weapon that you can get in the thing. Everything has a long, ridiculous name that no player ever actually uses.
See, the only other Exalted podcast I know of is called The Systematic Understanding of Everything.
Yes. That was pretty much our inspiration, podcast wise. I kind of listened to that and thought they're doing kind of ideas for story seeds for really broad areas of Exalted. Like they would cover the West in a single episode and say, well, what sort of games do you want to run? And it's like, okay, so, but there's a whole bunch more stuff in the West than just the West. Oh, the West covers a whole lot of stuff. What about if you want to dig down, if you want to go to the Call or to Luth or to the Wavecrest Archipelago, and just treating those locations as things to talk about and talk through for sources for inspiration and how you do that. That was kind of how I came across it, because I thought, what if the systematic understanding of everything, but more in depth?
Okay.
And then he put out the Call. He put out the Call, and I was one of the few people nuts enough to go in even more depth.
Pretty much.
All right. So I'm assuming you can be found on most podcatchers, any other socials, anything like that you want to shout out?
Yeah, we have a website which is wondrousatlas.wordpress.com. That has our episodes and our affiliate links and all that good stuff. It has a handful of write-ups for some of the story seeds and stuff we discussed. When we get to the end of our second season, which will be in, I want to say about 6 weeks or so time, about 3 episodes time from now, then we will take a break, and part of that will be writing up a lot, some of the story seeds we talked about, so into things that are actually workable within the Exalted setting. So you'll find all of the stuff on there. We are on Twitter at Wondrous Atlas, and wondrousatlas@gmail.com is the email if you want to send us any questions.
All righty then.
Well, I think with all that being said, we move into our next segment, which is Game of the Week.
Woohoo! Game of the Week!
Game of the Week! Game of the Week!
So, would you like one of us to go first as kind of an example here, and then kind of make a sandwich or play it by ear or something like that?
However it goes. You kick things off.
You expect us to know the rules for our podcast?
Yes.
Right? For real? Anyways, I have mine ready if you're good with that, Steve.
Sure.
All right. I have one here that is a technically remastering of an older game. 2014 it was originally released. It's been remastered and uploaded to drive-through. It's called Into the Odd. This is published by Free League. Author is Chris McDowell. And the artist is Johan Noor, which you might know, who is the artist for Morkborg. Bastion is the only city that matters in its industrial age. It sits a smoke-shrouded hub of mankind surrounded by a world of lurking horrors and cosmic interference. The underground spreads beneath your feet, and the stars loom above. And so you're exploring wild, wondrous places in this bizarre realm. And I think anything that Johan Noor is art on or working on, I am 100% down for. Morkborg and Cyborg, the art just, to die for. And this seems really, really cool. Just sort of a refresh and re-release of an older game by Free League that I would say the older version probably wasn't super popular, and Free League comes along and goes, hey, we can make that happen for you. But
yeah. Reading this blurb, it looks like it's kind of based off of. I think he may be the same guy who did Electric Bastion Land.
Yes, it is the same guy that did Electric
Bastion
Bastion
Land.
Yes. And I am 100% down for industrial anything mixed with cosmic horror. And again, Johan Noor's art is phenomenal, always. So I'm sure this is gorgeous. Based on the cover art, it's already gorgeous. But again, that's Into the Odd.
Yeah, that kind of art style just kind of hits you in the face of kind of weird sort of almost impressionism kind of thing. Just looking at that cover, it's just very, very kind of veering into sort of surrealism, and hopefully the mechanics will kind of sling you around and be able to just kind of give you whatever strange reality you can find. And
yeah, so I did some Google Foo and found some art from inside of the book.
Oh,
and yeah. It's
very pretty.
Oh, hello, I'm catching feelings.
And the best part is it's $15 for the PDF. So that is quite a good deal. I love how they added, so all of the art has all of these little, almost all of the art has all of these little like circles and dashes and notations, almost as though somebody is taking images and analyzing, like the Disney film Atlantis. They sort of had these just mythological images that they had circled and drawn on and made notes of, and it just seems awesome. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's mine for the week.
All right. So would one of you gentlemen like to go next?
Absolutely. I've been, apart from Exalted and various other kind of World of Darkness games and that sort of thing, I've been digging into Blades in the Dark lately, and one of the things that's sort of given me an itch for is kind of thinking, well, can we have something with a bit more kind of depth to it and fluff to it? And so I found Spire: The City Must Fall, which is basically Blades in the Dark, but for a fantasy RPG. You are playing a bunch of dark elves who are oppressed by the high elves and being essentially made into a slave caste. So you've decided enough is enough, and so you are turning against the rightful rulers of the city, evading the authorities, and trying to overthrow the system. In this sort of, it feels kind of like urban fantasy style thing from the artwork. It looks very, very kind of, I almost say kind of just a slightly brighter version of Watchmen from the artwork. And
this is a Grant Howard game, so I'm sure that it's got all of that.
Yeah, it just feels that I don't know, Blades just leaves me a little kind of, can I have a bit more depth, please. Whereas where Spire kind of feels like it will have that setting and have everything a bit more mapped out and what everything means that little bit more. So if you got that sort of heist game itch that Blades kind of satisfies, but you then want to take it a little further, then Spire feels like the one to go for. I've not actually got it myself, but it's kind of on my wish list.
I've heard very good things about it, and
Yeah.
what of Grant's work I've experienced has been very, very good, although admittedly it was some of his less serious work.
Yeah, I mean, Grant Howitt is known for doing some really fantastic supplements to Paranoia and working on Paranoia in general. And so I absolutely have high hopes for that and would love to get my hands on it. Take a look at that in the near future. All right, who wants to go next?
You're going to alternate or fly?
Hey, either way.
All right. I don't know whether this counts as being obvious or not, because it's one of the few ones that I haven't mentioned, I think on our podcast, but shouldn't come as any surprise given all the rambling I have done. I'm going to shill Ars Magica a bit. So, I mentioned earlier that I love me some metaplot. I love the little deranged idea it had of making Exalted a prequel to The World of Darkness. Ars Magica's the other prequel to The World of Darkness that they did. This is a magic system that grew a game around it. I'm sure the development history, because it's an old Reinhagen game that's gone through so many editions now. But
Jonathan Tweet worked on that too, didn't he?
Yes, it's got its 5th edition now. It's had it for ages, but I've been mostly digging through 3rd edition stuff. This feels like a magic system that grew a game around it in the best possible way. So all your characters are mages, are magi, are wizards, whatever name you want to use for it. It's generally set in what they like to call mythic Europe, i.e. we're based in sort of medieval history, except reality is working according to all of the beliefs at the time. Standard thing of if you use magic to do a lightning bolt, it's not going to conduct because people didn't know that conducting electricity was a thing, but it will hone in on the spire of a church because people believe that. It's got an amazing... I'm going to ramble about the magic system for a bit. It's got this amazingly in-depth magic system. You can build spells that you buy with experience to set off reliably, but that's the boring way of doing it. The far more fun way requires baby's first Latin lessons, because the Order of Hermes, the big pan-European organization that all wizards with their salt belong to, has developed the universal theory of magic, which states that you have to speak Latin for it to work, and most people do. And it's basically built around combining, to go a bit adventure gamey, combining verb effects with magical properties. Like, let's say you want to, let's say you want to summon up a wall of earth, you go creo terram, where you combine the magic verb thing that you can learn in of creo, of making stuff, with element earth. And it's all stuff like that. It's also... and this is why I'm sort of saying it's a bit obvious for me as someone that's into Exalted, got a massively convoluted political system in its world building around the aforementioned Order of Hermes, which is all divided up into houses and subgroups that all politic and nefariously wizard about each other. And yeah, I'm wary that I'm sounding a bit incoherent because I'm babbling about something that I've had far, far too much fun with. But it's an excellent little setting, an excellent little magic system that kind of does just... it calls out for a game to be run in it, even if I can't particularly right now think of some that would, because you're having a struggle with the all-caster party idea, basically. Although it also has the mechanic for grogs, where basically every player is going to have their wizard, and then will also... the party as a whole at character creation kind of have to work to make the, not quite NPCs, but you have your wizards living in their tower, you will have your guards, your soldiers, your trackers and hunters and all of that. And in any scene where one of the other players' wizards isn't there, they get to play with some of those ones, sort of thing. It's got they call it troop style. There we go. That was the term they like using throughout. But that's another nice little mechanic that I love pilfering. That's a thing I tend to do with a lot of these RPGs that I dig up is basically just start pilfering mechanics to pull them into other games.
Cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds really cool.
All right. So if that's yours, I have found one that I literally just found it this evening, but it sounds really cool. And as most of our listeners will know, I have kind of a soft spot for kind of cyberpunkish things.
No.
So
what
I've what I've found is a game called Identico, Identeco, and as it turns out, there's a starter bundle on drive-through, which includes the core book and a couple of little supplements. But the premise of this game is essentially the year's 2099. There were a series of devastating nuclear attacks on America's heartland by no one really knows who. Things got rebuilt, but to kind of help everything along, the UN created the Centralized Human Identity Program, CHIP, as a universal ID program for the world. So it's implanted in you and carries your entire identity, all your metadata, passports, blah, 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 blah. Well, the corporations have figured out how to manipulate people using this. So targeted advertising has been taken to like a whole new level. And so it kind of feels like kind of a cyberpunk Shadowrun, but where to a certain point the focus is a little more on the social interactions than the run and gun. And like I love the tagline for the game, I think is best summed up in the final sentence of the listing on drive-thru. It says, as the game progresses, the thin line between famous and infamous depends solely, underlined, on who's watching. And like I don't know, it's a unique system, so I know nothing of the mechanics, but says it's fast and easy. Says when you do have to resort to combat, it's simple, fast, and deadly. Experience and reputation are tied together. So it sounds like even if I don't want to play this actual game, to take some elements of this, to go to Raelz's thing about, scavenging and stealing, this would be a wonderful thing to add into, like this is like paranoia on a whole nother level in a lot of ways, kind of. Yeah. So like I said, I just found this, and like I said, if you want just the starter book, the PDF will set you back $16 US. I don't know what that translates to for you guys. The starter bundle, which includes the core book, a starter adventure, a map, and it's a source book for Vancouver. $20 digital.
That's an interesting choice. So are humanoid games based around Vancouver?
I mean, I don't know, but it's I don't know how it hasn't hit my radar yet. But it does sound really interesting in concept at the very least.
Yeah, it's giving me Netrunner vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the covers look very cyberpunkish, and the themes feel appropriately kind of dystopian and techie, although not overly cyber. But yeah, like I said, that's from what the heck is the name of the company?
Humanoid Games.
Yes, Humanoid Games. So yeah, Identico is my pick this week. Like I said, if nothing else, it seems like it would be promising scavenging source material.
Yes.
So it sounds like a very successful game of the week.
Indeed.
Lots of choices.
Yeah. So I would just like to say thank you both very much for coming to talk and tell us all about this and being willing to stay up till stupid o'clock your time.
It's all good. This is why we do it on the weekend.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us today.
It's been a blast, guys. Thank you.
And,
Indeed.
Welcome to the network. If no one else has told you, even though it hasn't, maybe isn't officially announced, depending on when Chris gets around to updating the website.
Time is a circle.
Yeah. All good to be here.
Oh, well, all that being said, we want to thank everyone for listening and remind you to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at @andrpgs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.